Michael, last time around, you took us through a series of countries and briefed us on their reopening plans. What are you seeing in that overseas data since we last spoke?
I think purely from a overseas data perspective, the numbers, generally speaking, are looking actually quite good. In the large numbers that you see are just the updated totals as of this weekend. In brackets is the percentage change from the absolute number that we had a month ago. So overall, what we're seeing, particularly in Europe, but also across Asia Pacific, is a significant slowing of growth, with a few notable exceptions highlighted in red here. Singapore, which is to the great embarrassment of the Singaporean government, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened there, not done well at all. Is actually an unmitigated disaster, frankly. But the big outliers here, the United States, I mean, in the last month, up 56%. Sweden in the last month up over 68%. What's happening in Sweden is just, I think, a catastrophe. I've always been very critical about their approach. On a global scale, this curve is not good. I mean, it continues to go up and to the right. On the next slide, we'll see the United States. This curve is still not great, but it's certainly starting to reduce the slope of the upward trend. Again, this is not great, but it's better than it was a month ago. Hong Kong. Okay, this is what you want to see, right? This is a full wave completed. New Zealand is virus-free. Congratulations. These guys did a fantastic job, and this is what I think the world should be striving for. They took a tremendous amount of pain, a lockdown like a few other countries actually were willing to take the pain. But I was actually just on the phone with friends of mine in Christchurch yesterday. Life is actually returning to a complete normal there now. New Zealand, under the leadership of their really outstanding prime minister, one has to say, has achieved that. And lest somebody say, well, they got a very lefty government, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the government in Australia is fairly conservative, actually, and they're on the same path, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're conservative or liberal or left or right. You know, this can be achieved. And bear in mind, Australia is a far larger country, far greater population than New Zealand, and they can achieve this. Lest you believe this cannot be scaled, look at Germany. I mean, just awesome, okay? They peaked at 73,000 active cases in the beginning of April, and they're now below 10,000. This can be done at, an 80, 84, 85 million population as well. So there's really no size limit to your country to be able to achieve results. All right, and here's the unmitigated disaster of Sweden. A different policy approach, but this curve is steepening, and it's steepening vis-a-vis what we have achieved here in the United States, albeit how little that has been. So I really don't know what policy makers in Sweden are thinking and where they think this is going to go, but this is not working. Russia here is interesting, was not on our radar screen, but they have clearly taken steps to arrest this increase in active cases. So kudos to them. Brazil is accelerating an unmitigated disaster. I mean, this slope is really not too different from what you're seeing in Sweden, and I don't know where this is supposed to end. If you think about Brazil now heading, obviously in the southern hemisphere, into its winter season, you've got slums, you've got poor sanitation, you've got, massive population clusters living in very small spaces. So I think this needs to be watched, but there's not much good that's going to come out of Brazil. The government has very conveniently chosen after June 4th to evaluate further loosening of restrictions. And of course, June 4th, if you don't know, you should know, it's an extremely important date. It is the anniversary of the Tiananmen Massacre in 1989, when thousands, if not tens of thousands, were massacred by the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese Communist Party. And it's an important date in Hong Kong, where traditionally there have been pretty significant gatherings and vigils and memorials and protests, and this is not something the central government in Beijing likes to see. And of course, the Hong Kong government, kowtowing to Beijing, uses every opportunity these days to please their master, and so of course this demonstration has been shut down. Virus-free, essentially, like New Zealand, they were just so early recognizing that there was a problem on New Year's Eve, December 31st. I mean, really before anybody else, frankly, had figured this out. Yeah, so Sweden chose a special path under the leadership of their chief epidemiologist, Dr. Anders Tegnell. And the goal here was from the outset to live with the disease, with the virus. Okay, it's not working. That's really what matters. So if you look at the top left chart of daily new cases, I mean, those are just stagnant. The waves that you see are just weekends where there's a lag in reporting on the testing front. And, let's just start with this data. This is not good data, okay? They're testing about 23,650 people per million in Sweden. That's not a good number. Okay, they're not even testing to the standard of other Western European countries. Nonetheless, it's not as if the Swedish economy is actually doing that great. The hit that the Swedish economy is taking is really comparable to that of other wealthy Central European countries. So I really wonder, and I'm going to talk to Neil, and hopefully he'll do some more work on this, but what the long-term impact on Swedish society of this is going to be. The Swedish ambassador to the United States is and has been for the last month, trying to explain to audiences here how there's a greater degree of trust by the Swedish people in one another and in Swedish institutions and in Swedish politicians. Okay, that is true, and that has historically been true, and that was obviously true in this case as well. But this didn't work. So what happens now with that degree of trust in the medium and long term is going to be very interesting. And frankly, I know that in the scientific community in Sweden, there is heavy debate as to where to go from here. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something change, and we're going to continue to monitor this. In the United States, we never really had an FAA ground stop. Well, we didn't have an FAA ground stop. Some airlines, myself living here in Las Vegas, Southwest is in the air here constantly. So there's been a significant movement of people around the United States, and I personally happen to think that this is a big contributor to the numbers not being where they should be in the U.S. That is very much not the case when we look at the world. Emirates, by available passenger kilometers, the largest non-U.S. carrier in the world, they're not operating, okay? This airline has, 115 or 120 A300s. I don't know how many, many dozens of 777s and other aircraft connecting Asia, Africa, North America, Europe, Asia, Pacific, Australia, New Zealand with one another. There are virtually no flights happening whatsoever. Currently, they're serving London, Frankfurt, Paris, a couple cities here in North America, Toronto and Chicago, and a couple in Australia, but only for repatriation flights. And the CEO of Emirates stated just over the weekend that he believes it's going to be 2 to 4 years for international air travel to return to where it is. Okay, that's not a V-shaped recovery. Singapore Airlines, this sounds great if you brief it in a headline, flying to 27 destinations in June and July, up from 15 in May, until you realize that that's a 94% cut in their capacity pre-virus. Okay, so international air travel is dead. I predict it will continue to remain dead for quite a while. All of these large international carriers that bring people from one country to another have virtually no business, are unable to fly because of local restrictions in one country or another. And this recovery, even with travel bubbles, is going to take a very, very long time. And overall, I think we do know, whether we like them or not, there are best practices. We know what works now, okay? This was a grand experiment. Different countries chose different paths. Different countries are choosing different paths right now in terms of the reopening. We're going to learn over the next 4, 8, 12 weeks what's working, what's not working there. And so we're going to have a much better toolkit to work with and choose from to manage that. So I'm not really concerned, frankly, about the United States, Canada, Europe, some of the more developed countries in Asia. I'm certainly very concerned about China, just because I think there's too much cover-up and not a free enough flow of information. I'd be very concerned about India. I'd be very concerned about Latin America, traditional developing countries that just do not have the public health infrastructure and the capital, frankly, that's needed in order to build out the infrastructure that's needed to do early detection.